Hello there! Today we're starting a new series of videos. It's about famous authors and what I have personally learned from them as a writer. And our first author is one of my favorites, Robert E. Howard. You may not know the name, but you definitely know that his most famous hero, Conan the Barbarian. Robert Howard was born in Texas in the beginning of the 20th century and died in a very early age in 1936 on the 11th of June. He created a lot of pulp heroes like Conan the Barbarian, Kane, King Kull, and many others. He is also very well known as a Cthulhu Circle writer. He had a very close connection to Howard Phillips Lovecraft. They constantly mailed each other, but they never met. What I've learned from Robert E. Howard: first of all, how to write in an epic way, because technically his writing is amazing. And it's a shame that we have seen many copycats of Robert Howard, many versions of his heroes, many adaptations to comic books, to the movies, and they make him look like a lesser writer. Well, one can say that he used to use way too many adverbs and adjectives, but despite what most writers do, his pacing and his vocabulary made his writing dynamic. He was prone to using alliteration. He also used the triptych. The triptych is using three similar words in a row, mostly verbs, and that gave the writing a very frenetic pace. He also was using repetition of certain words, so that created atmosphere, and the pacing was always going hand to hand with what was happening in the text. Many of those stuff are also used in the epics. Like, for instance, he used a lot of similes, or instead of naming the heroes, he used their traits. Let me read you an example from one of his stories. In the gardens of the palace, the torches glinted on polished helmets and carved swords and gold-chest corselets. All the noble-born fighting men of Ayodhya were gathered in the great palace or about it, and at each broad arched gate and door 50 archers stood on guard, with bows on their hands. But death stalked through the royal palace, and none could stay his ghostly tread. That's amazing. That's okay, I can read that well. You can get that. I'm a very bad reader. But that's amazing writing. There is a rhythm there. Every word is put in a place where it has impact. Okay, personally, I don't write like that. I'm not that of a baroque writer, but that's amazing. That's really amazing. On the dice, under the golden dome, the king cried out again, racked by awful paroxysm. Again his voice came faintly and far away. Again the Devi bent to him, trembling with a fear that was darker than the terror of death. Wow. The second thing that Howard taught me was how I can play with genre tropes and conventions. Howard is the father of sword and sorcery. Okay, maybe the grandfather, maybe the father is Fritz Lieber, but okay, you get the point. And if you ask me what's Robert Howard's stories like, I would say it's horror stories where the hero beats up the beast. Even in his most traditional horror stories, and he has plenty of them, even when he tributes Lovecraft, his heroes make it to the end. And even half Conan stories were very traditional horror stories where the Conan the Barbarian just beats up the monster and takes the treasure and the wench and they go away. Okay, he was a writer for pulp magazines like Weird Tales, so he had to write to their audience, to their style, but he always had his personal touch on the story, and he created something new every time. For instance, he had a Conan as a hero in a Detective Whodunit, that's The Gold in the Bowl, or he even had a western with Conan, Beyond the Black River. And here we come with a third radical advice from Robert Howard, that differentiation is the secret to the recipe. Okay, many Robert Howard stories are very similar. He found a formula and stuck to it. And I mean, okay, there's so many Conan stories. When Conan goes to some ruins, there is a damsel in distress there is a huge ape, and there's treasure. But his secret was that he always knew what little changes he could make to the recipe, and this would change the story and the dynamics. For instance, we have Red Nails, and Red Nails was one of his much later stories. It was a story about Conan, ruins, monsters, and a girl. But the girl was not a lady in distress, it was Valeria. And she is as capable as Conan in combat, and she proves her worth all over the story. We have the daughter of the ice giant, and we have no damsel in distress, she's a lure. That's a great story. And then we have Beyond the Black River, one of my favorite Conan stories, where there is no lady in distress, it's a soldier in distress. And he's also the narrator because Conan is so amazing that we have to see him through the eyes of another character, a mere mortal, to feel his majesty, his prowess. Another thing I've learned from Robert Howard is how you can make your heroes memorable. Because, okay, there is something many people will criticize Howard about, and it's the fact that all of his heroes is exactly the same person. He's a tall, he's a muscular, Celtic character, and he's barbaric, or barbaric-like in the case of Solomon Kane. I mean, even Solomon Kane, who was an Englishman, he was Cornish. That meant he was a Celt, and a dark Celt too. Nevertheless, if you've read the stories of those characters, you can remember which is which, and that's an achievement, not only because the settings are different. They're not. I mean, Conan and King Kull are almost exactly in the same setting. It's prehistory, it's Bronze Age fantasy, but he used a lot of tricks to make you remember who his character is. I mean, each hero has his own expression, and he makes sure that they always repeat that. Conan shouts by Chrome. Solomon Kane is usually somber Puritan, but this time in each and every story, he will utter an oath out of his outrage for something that's happening. And that's very funny when you start to notice that. And you remember which is which. And he's also making sure that he repeats the traits of the heroes. Their origin, the color of their hair. I mean, Conan is often referred to as a Cimmerian, Kane as a Puritan, Kull as Atlantean. And those repetitions stick to you. You may not remember the name, but you definitely remember who this character is. They gave the hero's identity, and that's important because, as I said before, some of the stories are a bit interchangeable. Not that much though, because the settings differ. And also every character has some trademark plots. Conan is a thief, goes to dangerous places and tries to steal treasure. Kull is a king, and he often has to deal with his subjects wanting to marry someone and they can't. I'm serious about that. Half King Kull's stories are about people who want to take his throne, and the other half is about people trying to get married. That's funny. Solomon Kane is dealing with occult monsters, mostly in Africa or Europe. And then you have some stories in World War One, in the Middle East, and other historical adventures, or boxing tales, or I don't know what else. He wrote a ton of stuff. The final thing I've learned from Robert Howard is that plot is more important than world building. I mean, okay, Howard had a general sense of his world. He had a history of the world, and actually it's a secondary fantasy world, meaning that the Hyborian Age, the Age of Conan, or the Age of King Kull are different parts in human history. It's Bronze Age or Copper Age fantasy, and there's a certain way why we got from King Kull to Conan, and how they're linked, how their people are linked together, and how that world became our world. But he never let this world building, which was pretty thin, constrain him. If he had a story to tell, and okay, sometimes he took stories he has written with other heroes and made them into Conan stories in order to sell them. That's why the Hyborian Age is very rich and sometimes doesn't make sense and contradicts what I said about memorable heroes. Okay? When he had a story to tell, he shaped the world around it. And that's his main difference between sword and sorcery and high or epic fantasy. Many other fantasy authors build a world and they use the story as a vehicle to explore the world. Instead, what Robert Howard did and what other sorcery authors did is they made their own stories, their characters, their plots, and they adapted the world to them. And That's really important for me because in fantasy the world is more important than anything else, and I think it often doesn't work that well. I hope you liked this small rant about Robert E. Howard, and I would be really interested to hear your views about Robert E. Howard or suggestions about other authors you want to listen about. If you like this video, please press the like button, subscribe for more videos like that. I'll see you around.